I'm doing the speaking tonight, so when I start, I'm just gonna roll.
You're ready.
And I have a couple of announcements from the last week. One is that we're actually having an extra session next Monday. We're going to continue Pastor Greg's presentation about history of racism in the Lutheran Church, because he got about 2/3 of the way finished. So we had a couple of requests for that, and it's the same link. I'll send that out to everybody to let them know. And if we can stay on for the whole hour and a half, we can have some breakout group time to talk about that, and also to talk about the series in general. The other announcement I want to make is that Claim is going to be hosting some book studies, and those start next Tuesday. You can look at our racial justice page, our main racial justice page, and you can find the information there. The first book next Tuesday is So You Want to Talk About Race, and it's a really good book for learning how to start the conversation. And that author goes into some details on some of the topics that I'm going to be covering tonight that I won't have time to talk about in as much detail. So those two things are next week. We are always open to anybody that wants to join our racial justice team. You can email me, or I think if you put your email in the chat, I can get it later on. And we do an educational thing at the beginning of our meeting. That meeting is usually in the middle is Wednesday at 12:30, and it's this coming Wednesday. It's once a month. And then we'll be, we have business just talking about upcoming trainings and other things. I already put in the chat a reference. Some of the material that I'm going to be using tonight comes from Robin DeAngelo. That title there I put is the video that she uses, and also her book. And if anybody has questions, I guess, Justina, are you going to be able to keep an eye on that a little bit?
I am doing that. Yes, Kathy.
Thank you. I see you've already put up some stuff. You and Karen are both, you're great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'm going to get started. So tonight we, like we've been doing, presentation with questions and answers, if towards the end or at certain breaks if you really need something answered. And I'm very much expecting that we'll have time for small group discussions. And this is a great topic to be doing it with, because this is a little bit more personal. So we're going to talk about understanding your biases. I will be using myself as an example / guinea pig. Some awareness of some general concepts about how biases affect behaviors, and then talk about discerning your voice and your role and some actions you can take. So with that, I'm going to start with scripture. The first prayer I want to use to center ourselves in this concept is this reading from Ephesians, reconciled through Christ. For he himself is our peace. He has made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. Now, this passage we know is specifically referring to the separation between Gentiles and Jews, but Jesus' ministry obviously was very much about removing barriers of class, race, sex, privilege, power. There's so many examples of who he ministered to, and how he made a point of putting everyone on equal footing in their relationships with each other. And I like to think of it as he gave us the freedom to love one another without prejudice. So that's our purpose today, is to move one step closer to removing the barriers that separate us from each other. And then we look at the 4th chapter of Ephesians, And Paul writes about how we follow Jesus' example as the head of the body that leads us in the way we should go, so that we're not blown around by every wind of doctrine or trickery or scheming, that we speak the truth to each other in love, and that we become united as one body, knit together, so that every part, every individual, every person in the earth is part of the body and working together. When they're working together properly, then they're promoting the entire body, the entirety of society. They're building each other up in love. And again, that's what we're here to try to really think about. How do we make these personal? How do we make this personal, and how do we make this positive, and how do we break down the barriers and build up each other for the greater good? So we start by knowing our own stories. So I use these questions as an outline to tell you my personal story. And this information comes from Robin DiAngelo's work, which is why I gave her credit in the chat. But there are also things for you to think about as I move through my story. Think about your story. When did you first become aware of your race? What interactions do you have with people of other ethnic or racial backgrounds in your formative years? What attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors are most difficult to discard when interacting with people who are ethnically or racially different from yourself? Feel free to write down thoughts as they occur, and this is something that you can be doing when we go to the breakout groups, is to talk about some of these things. I also encourage you that this is a way that you can start these discussions with members of your family. If you want to get much more into this, I do have an inventory, kind of like a little checklist inventory that you can use. Just email me. It's a set of questions, and you can, after you answer them, that'll give you an idea of where you stand and what you might want to talk about. And that's another thing that you can do with family members or people that you trust. So what we're going to discover here is that some of us may, and some of us may not, have a unique ethnic identity. But we've all developed a racial identity, because in the United States, we live in a largely segregated society. So we have developed a racial identity. So here's my story. I grew up in a segregated, white, upper middle class suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. My parents both went to college. My father was a doctor. We went on annual vacations in hotels and resorts. Diversity in my town consisted of whether you were Jewish, Italian, or Irish, or something else white European. Our family is Italian. We knew that our family came from Italy, bought land, worked hard to feed themselves, made small wages through manual labor. I was told that was the American way, and that's why we were now so successful. That's what I was told. We did work hard, but there's more to the story. When I was growing up, my mother drove to Newark every week to pick up Marie. Marie was the Black woman who cleaned our house. Mom said she did this because Marie couldn't afford a car and needed the work. Her friends did the same for Marie on the other days of the week. My father was nervous about it because he grew up in Newark, and he said it wasn't safe anymore because it was all Black people now. In school, I don't remember ever having a teacher that wasn't white, even all the way through college at University of Maryland. I remember in middle school learning about the Civil War in terms of the fact that we were the good guys because we Northerners fought against slavery. But then I found out that there was slavery in the North, and there was plenty of prejudice. I remember discussing dating boys and my father trying to be open-minded by saying that he would be okay with anyone I dated unless they were Black. That's my 4th grade class. That's my sister and I at Christmas. It was insane. So I passed this privileged lifestyle down to my children. This is us on vacation in Hawaii. Some habits die hard. I still have a young Black man who comes from Baltimore City to clean my house. And lately he's had to rent a car or get an Uber just to get here, and it makes me remorseful. My best friend still lives in New Jersey. She's in the town of Summit, which is more racially diverse than our hometown of Livingston. But she has found that there is a lot of racial tension. It turns out that in Summit, literally got its name from the summit, where the wealthy people lived at the top of the hill. They came from New York and they owned summer homes there. And the top of the hill got a nice breeze and nice views. So they built these summer cottages, which are mansions. And the Black folks were hired to be the servants to care for the homes. Many of the Black families that live in Summit today are descendants of those servants, some 4 and 5 generations back. The other picture up here I share because this is a Madonna that was one of the customary symbols in our home. And you can see, I guess you can probably imagine, I was raised Catholic, Italian Catholic. And this image of Jesus and Mother Mary is sort of typical, the kind of images that we saw back in the day, where all of the religious features looked Renaissance or Roman. So from a very young age, I had this stereotype in my mind about how Jesus and Mother Mary looked. So I don't tell this story about myself to brag, and I don't tell it to give myself an excuse for my biases. Partially, I tell it so that you can learn how to hear other people's stories, but I mostly tell it because it reminds me that I am biased down to my core identity. It's a reminder that it's incumbent on me to recognize that my life is a true and real manifestation of racism in this country. I started to question some things about my life when I was 8. The first question, April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed for the color of his skin. Why? Why? I really didn't. Prejudice, that's all I knew. But 8 years old was my first introduction to racial issues. I really didn't think about it much at all until 2015, when Freddie Gay was killed in the back of that police van, and I cried, and I said, why? I just didn't get it. And that was when I joined this racial justice team, and it helped me a lot to be able to talk to people and to start to understand the underlying nuances of what was happening in this country. The third question came into my life about 2 years ago when we were studying redlining as part of one of our racial justice meetings. And I was like, oh, that's why the Black people lived in Newark and not in my town, because it was forced segregation. There was redlining. The homes in those suburban neighborhoods were not open to Black people. The final question didn't actually come into my mind until last year. I was talking to one of my mother's caregivers. She's from an African nation, I think Liberia. I told her the story about my family's immigration because I knew she was an immigrant and I thought we could have something in common. But honestly, she looked at me and she said, I wish land was available that was affordable, that we could buy, and we could build our own home like your ancestors did. And we could use the land to grow food and keep chickens to feed ourselves like your ancestors did. And I was like, this thing that my family had, this property, was an asset that was carried down through the generations that has given us an advantage, and it's the very thing that Black families in the United States were denied. So I'm embarrassed. I really thought my story would make a connection. Well, it did, and I learned. But it was still surprising, even after this journey. This is just a never-ending journey. So I pray, Lord, I have sinned against you by what I have done and by what I have failed to do. I confess that I have benefited from the sin of racism. I have treated others unfairly. I still treat others unfairly. I'm often indifferent to prejudice that has harmed others and benefited myself. By your grace, I ask your forgiveness. By your grace, I ask for guidance and to be a conduit for justice and healing. And I write this in present tense because it is ongoing work. And it's important to me, obviously. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to give you an idea about how ingrained this becomes in your psyche by doing a little bit of a silly exercise that we love to do called "This is not a water bottle." This is not a water bottle. Now, you might look at me and say, but that is, it's a plastic bottle filled with water, it's a water bottle. But I'm telling you it is not. I'm telling you, in my house, this is a football. In my house, this is a door stopper. In my house, this is a fake microphone we use for karaoke, and we have one of them, and it's the microphone. So you have to really make an effort to consciously undo those stereotypes that are in your mind. Some of these things that you learned have to be unlearned, and you have to continuously try to keep an open mind and to look beyond what you see on the surface. That's how hard it is for me to unthink my privilege. So the other reason I like to do this exercise is because it opens your mind to new possibilities. Think about how much more valuable a water bottle could be if it was so many more things than a water bottle. So it's the same with people. People are much more valuable and much more meaningful when you know what lies under the surface, when you know the fullness of their culture and their history and their personal stories. So the thing I always have to remember is that in my life, my skin color was never a barrier. I always had choices. And it's still hard for me to realize that some people don't have choices. But that's one of the stereotypes that I am still working to try to undo out of my life. The next thing I want to talk about is that image of the Renaissance Madonna and Child. These are some images. The center one is from Ethiopia, an Ethiopian artist, Madonna and Child. On the right is obviously an Asian image of Madonna and Child. And on the bottom left is an image from a anthropologist of what they believe Jesus actually looked like, based on the time of, the year and location of his birth and growing up. I just want you to sit with these pictures for a minute. What does this tell you? What does this story tell you? What do you see in this person? What if this person was Jesus? What if this person was walking down your street in a ripped shirt and a ripped pair of pants? It's not some of the images where many of us are accustomed to seeing. But we need to be seeing Jesus in every single one of these pictures. All righty, back to a prayer. I want to talk again about the diversity, because this is what I'm trying to get at, is that is that one of the things that racism does is it separates us from the beauty and diversity of the whole world. By growing up in a racially segregated world, I did not have the benefit of connecting with the majority of people that God created. The vast majority of people God created are either Asian or African. I did not have the opportunity to connect with those folks growing up for a long time. So as we read in 1 Corinthians, the body has many members, and though they are many, they are all one in Christ. And they're all so important. If the ear could say to you, I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would make you less. But the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need for you. Nor can the head say to the feet, I have no need for you. Because then, the body would not be full, obviously. And the other thing is that all the bodies need to care for each other. They're all part of making the entire body happy or not. And if one member suffers, all suffer with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. So this is a little bit of basic, just a few issues to watch out for. Some basic concepts that I don't think we were able to touch on in the first seminar. One is the idea of being colorblind. This is something that I think came out of the civil rights movement. It's something that I was taught as a young girl. We don't see color, we just know everybody's the same. But what this does is it negates the differences that do exist between people. And it really makes it so that you can't celebrate the differences between people. And obviously it's not true that we don't see color. Bishop Eaton, I think in one of her recent sermons, says that we should be color amazed, not colorblind. Stereotyping, I think we've just talked about, but I want to say one more thing about that, which is that when anybody looks at a group and thinks of a stereotype, well, okay, I'm Italian, we eat a lot of pasta. Okay, cool. Yes, it is true. And my family does have a lot of characteristics you would find of stereotypical Italian families, but also I am who I am. So, when you only look at somebody from the standpoint of the group that they're associated with, you're not looking at them as an individual. And so that's another kind of pitfall to watch out for. Then there's this behavior called microaggressions. This is sometimes what happens when white people have sort of a very, very deep bias against somebody different, a Black person or some other race or ethnic group. And then you might act in a way that's defensive and you don't even know it. An easy example of this is if you're walking down the street and somebody's coming the other way and you see that they're dark skinned or whatever, if that's your bias, and you kind of clutch your purse more tightly. So you may not hardly even notice it, but a lot of times other people will notice it because it's actually an act of aggression because it against them. So that's something to be careful about. And finally, there's this concept called white fragility, which people use. Well, it's also the book by Robin DiAngelo. That's the title of her book. And it's when a white person is sort of defensive or uncomfortable talking about race. Whenever somebody brings it up, they get defensive and they just don't want to talk about it because there's like, it's not my problem. So why are you talking about it? And that is really a barrier to healing and to bridging the gap. So just be aware of that as well. And going along the lines, just in case I haven't made the point, So these are some things that there are some websites that say the stupidest things white people ever said. Well, these are some of them. And obviously people don't come in those colors. This is what Robin DeAngelo says all the time, don't come in those colors. So it's really demeaning to say that even. The comment about all lives matter instead of, to oppose the idea of Black Lives Matter is more sort of about like you're not listening. Somebody's trying to tell you I matter. It's like, I had an example. It's like if I said, I'm so sad today. I feel terrible. And you said to me, well, people get sad. All people get sad. All people get sad all the time. It's just not helpful. It kind of minimizes what the person is trying to say. Anyway, I've caught this third bullet. I have caught myself saying, you must be okay with, and I don't always say having less than, but you must be okay with, like, your car being old or whatever, like as if somebody might, have a choice, which they might not have a choice. Do we really have to talk about it is really about white fragility. And then people have often said, I'm not a racist because, or I'm not racist because I have Black friends, or because, I'm on the racial justice team. Well, it's there. It's there. I mean, I don't like to use I'm not racist or I am racist, or, you don't like to tell somebody that. That's like labeling somebody, but it certainly shouldn't be a defense that people should say either. I appreciate you listening to this part. Some of this is not easy for me to talk about, but I like to keep reminding myself of these things. So I'm going to move now. I don't know if I need to take a break. Anybody have anything? I see you guys were talking about redlining, and that's so good. So anyway, oh, thank you for the compliment. And we're definitely in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. Thank you for that. This is just a little pause. We're going to move now to the next segment, which is discerning your gifts. Because yes, there is hope. So I go back to the reading about unity and diversity in the body. Since we are all the body of Christ and each one of us is a part of it. And this is the passage that talks about your spiritual gifts. And I love this passage. This is very inspiring for me. And obviously this is not a exhaustive list of gifts that you could have or any person could have. But I do think that it is so valuable for people to know themselves and to know where their gifts are. And many people have many, many gifts, multiple gifts. And this is the first step towards discerning what types of actions you might want to take in fighting racism. I put two resources at the bottom. Stephen Ministry offers an 8-hour course called Discovering God's Vision for Your Life. Discovering God's Vision for Your Life. I can't type and talk, so you'll just have to go with that. It's an 8-hour course inventory where you can explore your spiritual gifts. And for congregations that have Stephen Ministry, you can contact your Stephen leaders and they will help you get connected with that resource. Discovering God's Vision for Your Life. Then Welka also has two resources. One is called Gifts for You, Opening Your Spiritual Gifts. And the other one is called Listening to God, A Guide to Discernment. And both of those are available on the Welka websites for free. So I would recommend any of those to do by yourself, with a friend, with a prayer buddy, with a pastor, with a group, however you like to do this stuff. Now, this is what I love. This is my fun slide. This comes from a t-shirt that I bought. And it starts, of course, it starts with my story. As soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh my gosh, there we are. There is my story. Dream like Martin. When I first saw this shirt, there were 3 people on here that I didn't know. The 4th one down is Marcus Garvey, and his life was really amazing. I've had to go back and read, I keep reading about him in Wikipedia. I'm like, wow, how did he even get on this list? This is a true example of how somebody doesn't fit a stereotype, but is so well regarded. So in case you haven't figured out, all these folks are very prominent, famous Black leaders. Marcus Garvey actually worked with the KKK because he believed in separating the races, and he wanted to have a pure African race. And he a lot of people followed his theories and his political movement. Madam CJ was an entrepreneur. She started a hair care company for Black women, and goes back a long time ago. And she was really, really hugely successful. I think one of the first women in this country to have a major successful enterprise business. And Webb is Webb Dubois, who was a very well-educated man. I'm going to say he went to Harvard, but I can't remember for sure. And I remember reading about him and Madam CJ in Atlanta at the Civil Rights Museum. And I was like, I wanted to know about these people. And they're so inspiring. But, you know, anyway, I look at this and I think about, you know, who are you? And where do you, what inspires you? Where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a dreamer, a leader, a fighter, a thinker, a writer, a builder, a speaker, an educator? You know, is it your faith that really pushes you? Are you the kind who wants to challenge the status quo? These are all ideas that I just want to throw out there and help you get inspired. And I also suggest that you pick a name or 2 on here and read their works, read about them, their life story, but also read their works. Most of these people have a lot of publications that they have written. Obviously, Martin Luther King Jr. has so many speeches that have been published. All of his works have been published. And things written about them as well. So now I want to get into some action conversation. I first want to talk about, and I'm sorry the slide is blurry, the difference between equality and equity, because really what we're talking about here is racial equity. And it should be pretty obvious looking at this slide, the difference between equality and equity. Because it's about the outcome. It's about whether or not the people can all see the same thing. They can all see over the wall. They're able to get to a place where they can get over the wall and be part of the game. And I think about the example of forced integration of schools through busing. And I feel like that was trying to put people on an equal footing. Everybody has equal things at school, but if you were from a poor neighborhood and, you know, you would get to maybe a more wealthy school, But you would still experience problems of racism. You would still experience hunger at home. It didn't really solve the problem. And this is what's hard for me to accept. Because the reason that you had to do things like that is because, like where I live in Howard County, Maryland, we fight for every penny for our schools. Our kids have all the computers that they need. Baltimore City doesn't have all the computers that they need. It just isn't right. It just isn't right. This is what equity is about, is when is enough enough, that we can start to be generous and put everybody on an equal playing field. And that's that. And then the other thing is, obviously, the third part of this is about liberation, where there is no fence, where there is no more fence. And I go back to scripture. There's a line from 1 Corinthians that says that we agree that there will be no divisions among you, and that you are made complete in the same mind and the same judgment. And in Philippians, Paul writes, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, so that I can hear that you're standing firm in one spirit, in one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel and for the good of the world. That's my own. Anyway, so when we talk about taking action, as far as the Lutheran Church goes, the ELCA has social statements, and the one that talks mostly about this issue is the social statement on race, ethnicity, and culture. And I just pulled out a piece of it, which kind of shows the breadth of the topic matter that we could be talking about. So with everything that's been happening, in the news, I put this here because I wanted people to see that there's so many areas where race is impacting how people live in this country. And I want to say that there must be something in here that speaks to you, where you could delve in deeper and learn more about it. So the first thing is civil rights, which obviously includes criminal justice system and police reform, access to education, health care, nutrition. I think we know that in a lot of the more poor neighborhoods, there's a lot of food scarcity. They call them food deserts. This statement talks about opportunities for fair employment. So that means getting rid of discrimination in employment. Businesses, banking and insurance. There's a lot of predatory lending practices where people know they know you can't repay, and they just keep increasing the fines instead of giving reasonable rates to pay. There's a whole issue with housing being, unstable. There's places where there's a lot of unfair rent practices still going on. And I added to the bottom, actually, this is not in the ELC social statement, but I'm also passionate about caring for creation, and I believe that everybody has a right to live with clean air and clean water. And then on the other social statements, I think it's interesting when you go back and you look at the social statements of some of these other topics. where there's an entire statement written about caring for creation, entire statement written about criminal justice, all of these topics. Each of these, when you read them in depth, you'll see that racial disparity and economic disparities, but racial disparities are specifically named as a cause of a source of problems in each of these topics. So it just shows that the racism adds a layer of injustice and inequity. And if you read each of these statements, it talks about the ways that this manifests itself throughout. And then I just wanted to highlight the last social statement is called Church and Society. It was written 30 years ago. I believe that that's when the ELCA started writing social statements. And I bring this up specifically to say that this is not, I think Patrick said this too in the first session, this is not about politics. This is about our calling as Christians. And I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from there. It says the church, on the idea of the church's responsibility in society, it says the gospel does not take the church out of the world, but instead calls it to affirm and to enter more deeply into the world. The church acts for the sake of the world in hope and prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth. And then on the idea of deliberating on social questions, it says, engage those of diverse perspectives, classes, genders, ages, races, and cultures in deliberation so that each of our limited horizons might be expanded and the witness of the body of Christ in the world enhanced. This is the basis of all of these social statements. And I'm going to go over to the chat because I see a couple of good points and about the statements, where you can find them. There are discussion guides on how to use them. Yeah. There's some really good points in that chat. I don't think there's anything I need to specifically address or answer. If there is, put it to me in the form of a question. Thanks. All righty. How am I doing on time? Oh, not too bad. All righty. Now, let's talk about some specific, let's get more specific. So that whole section was just to give you an idea of the breadth of the topics. So just to review, like we talked about, like your gifts, what gifts you might have, and then the topics, which is kind of like what content appeals to you, what content is important to you, which of those topics is something that you could be passionate and caring about and want to get involved in more deeply. In general, we all should be continuing to have conversations about race. I'm involved in a Sunday school group that is meeting every week, and we really didn't expect how much we look forward to having those weekly discussions to sort of hold each other accountable. And we continue learning. It's been a really great experience. And when you talk, you grow, you learn from each other. You just raise awareness. And I love the concept of being a bridge, which is just that the more that you can talk with people, the more comfortable you become, the more that you start to become of one mind, which is really what we want to do. Be an ally. This is an important concept in the fact that there are Black folks who have been advocating for themselves and fighting for these issues for a very long time. And sometimes they're afraid that us white folks are going to come in and decide that we have all the answers. we're going to just fix it all. And that is not what a good ally does. An ally is somebody that really takes your lead from the people who are being most affected and asking the question, what does this mean to you? How can I support you? And it requires having a trusting relationship with somebody who might be a victim of some of these racist actions. So it isn't something that you can just walk up to any stranger and talk about, because it really does get quite personal. And I think that being in a minority, sometimes it makes it that much harder to find your voice, because the white majority is so vocal. And so that's another part of being an ally, is to really be able to learn how to listen sincerely and hear the story behind the story. The third bullet is about confronting racism in your own congregation. You know, I want to go back to what we said. We all want to speak the truth in love with each other. We want to say that we love each other, but that we all have some baggage here that we need to acknowledge and own up to and do something to change it. So if any of you are here with others from your congregation, you might want to do a follow-up where you get together and talk about this. We've started talking about this actually in my Sunday school group, and you know, lo and behold, Howard County was like mostly slave plantations. And is there a reason why our white church is across the street from the historically Black churches? Probably. Donate or fundraise to an anti-racism group. I realize that donations is a little bit of a touchy subject, but I put it up here because I don't want people to shy away from it. And I'm going to get later on to a list of groups and websites you can go to that you should be able to find something that you can kind of stand behind. Being a witness is part of what what I did today, telling my story, telling truths that you know of, that maybe other people are in denial about. Again, holding each other accountable and being a mirror for each other so that we continue to grow. This can also be a very literal thing if you are witnessing police brutality or something that you think might not be right. There is actually a way to literally be a witness when somebody's being arrested or something to that effect. That is not my bailiwick, but there are people on this call who are good at it, and I can put you in touch with them. Join a protest. Bishop Eaton on June 5th wrote in her letter, continued peaceful protests, vigils, and demonstrations are not only legitimate, but essential to move this country and this church to honest and deep self-examination. And then advocating for racial equity is something that you can do so many places. You can do it in your family, you can do it in your neighborhood, you can do it in your job, you can do it in your church, you can do it in political arenas, you can do it in legal arenas. Keep it sort of just in your mind. So if an opportunity presents itself, you are equipped to discuss it. I put this in just to be for some people are better with letter writing or phone calling or email. Think about this. I'm a one-on-one kind of person. Obviously, I'm okay with making presentations. I wouldn't go to much larger of a public forum than this, probably. Social media is not so much my thing, but I'll email and I will post on Facebook. Anyway, lots of forums. This is, again, you can pick one of the topics and you can pick a method of communication and go for it. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's a list of websites, and I selected this. These have just been kind of coming across my email and Facebook and a variety of different places, but I tried to pick in here a wide variety of organizations so that you could see that you might find something that you're comfortable with to get involved in. And I'm just saying that, like, some of these are really liberal grassroots. Some of these are a lot more mainstream. Whatever your kind of, opinion or your bent is, you should be able to find an organization that fits with your, aligns with your perspectives that you could support. So this, we post these at the end and they'll be on the website. You can always go back to this slide, or if you want to take a picture of it, let me know and I'll come back to it. I think we're getting to the end. So yeah, that's it. In just this little summary: know your story, listen to the stories of others, identify and work to break down your biases, engage in honest conversations, and take action against racism, and pray for God's help and guidance at all times. So that's the end of the presentation. I don't see any questions. I would really love it if we could get into some breakout groups. And really, any of these things on this last slide is fair game to talk about in small groups. Your story, where you're at, what do you think that you're going to do next? Anything that comes up, if you have a question, we'll come back. Let's see, what time do we have, Justina?
7:55.
All righty. So 25 minutes for breakout groups.
Okay, so
and then we'll come back at 8:20.
Okay.
And we'll have time to just, as a larger group, anybody that wants to stay after the breakout groups, we can talk more about any more follow-up and what else you might want to do next. So I'll give everybody, we usually give everybody a little countdown till we go.
Okay. I'm going to count down from 10, and anybody, I see people are starting to leave already. So the countdown begins at 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ready. I don't, Well, I wanted to remind you about next Monday, and I'll send an email, and next Tuesday, which is claims book study. And I really wanted to just open up the last 5 minutes to see who wanted to, if anybody had any comments about the overall series or overall next steps. Where do you think we should go from here? I mean, I have 90 something people on the email list of everybody that expressed interest in these sessions. And I'm just so like grateful that many people cared enough to express an interest. I think we had 50 something participate tonight. So does anybody want to offer up any perspectives, learnings, comments, ideas for next steps?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Kathy. You've done a fantastic job. And it was really brilliant that you just had that automatic link to Zoom for us today. So I didn't have to spend 10 minutes trying to find it through all of the websites. For our next step, maybe we could do maybe some introduction so that we get to know each other, so we can feel us, so we know where the spirit is trying to move us. Does that kind of make any sense to you?
We are so many.
Just a little bit. Doesn't have to be everyone, just a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I thought I can, I mean, I could, I am going to go through and I'm going to identify all the congregations that participated. And put that information out there.
I think we should every once in a while get together and do breakout rooms with certain issues, and because we learned a lot from each other, and that's another way of getting LaSalle, to know each other.
Yeah. I thought about, I mean, I know, John's doing the lay leader forums now every 2 weeks, so I don't want to overdo more conversations, but obviously this is a targeted topic. And I mean, we do monthly meetings of our racial justice team, and we do pick a topic and talk about it. But then also we could do like these evenings once a month and pick a topic and talk about it.
That would be good.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe like during our breakout sessions, we could speak about experience that one of us may have had during that week, so that it can be expressed and say how can I have handled that differently, or how it made me feel, or you know what I'm saying? I'm a flight attendant, so we always do like jump seat therapy. It's like, this is how I feel. We just tell each other everything because we might not see each other ever again for the next 20 years.
I have a question. I'm Lydia Brown. And maybe the social justice team is working on this. I know there's a lot of groundwork to do, but is there any discussion about what reparations should consist of, or where we even start on trying to level the playing field?
I've had lots of ideas on that.
I mean, in terms of, well, so I read the How to Be an Anti-Racist, and obviously part of the issue in that book is we need to work to change policies in this.
Absolutely.
In Maryland and in the country, but it's like, when you think about several hundred years of being kept at a disadvantage. And
Absolutely.
it's certainly true of people of color. It's true of many lower income people. And, you know, I'm kind of like, where do we start to repair some of that or make up for some of that? And I know a big part of the thing is still getting other people to understand how devastating the racism has been to this country and the people in it. But I want to be working for something and not just talking about
Against something, yeah.
what's wrong, but what can we do to start making it different?
Yeah, we talked about that in our breakout group too.
Yeah,
A
I
lot
was thinking like maybe instead of all personal stuff, we have to look at the systems. What you're talking about, like picking an issue and, you know, we have to look at the systems and how we are, you know, we have privilege and what we can do about it.
I agree. I also know we have a lot of white folks have a lot of personal work to do also. I mean, you know,
Yes.
I know it's not as simple as saying, okay, why do we have to talk about that? Let's get on with doing something. I know the personal work needs to be done, but I also would like to give people something to work for. So I don't know where that goes. I probably should look at what the social justice team is doing.
I think it's a great
I
thing
think-
to talk about.
Lydia, I think you're onto something, and I think it's really at two levels. This is Pastor Greg from Jerusalem Lutheran Church, and one that I might suggest for any who are interested in this group is I participated in a Zoom that Pastor Ginny Price had put together. She encouraged people to watch the movie 13th on the 13th Amendment, and then had discussion about it afterwards, and you know, and then use some probing questions, such as, you know, how did that affect you personally? How did that, you know, what were the systemic things involved? And I think that would be something that, for me as a member of the racial justice team, I'd be very happy to be. I couldn't agree to do it every month, but I could agree to do 3 or 4 a year, if we had others who would be willing to just work as facilitators, and we came up with a list of movies, because I think there is so much out there, and I think movies are often a less threatening way to introduce things to our congregations. Right? If we, you know, when you show a movie like Harriet or Selma, I think it opens that opportunity to talk and to dialogue in a way that is slightly less frightening, for those of us who are white. And obviously that's what Claim is trying to do also in their book discussions over the next 3 months. So I would really encourage people to take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm all for it, Pastor Greg. Good to see you this evening. As we may have spoken before, I spend every weekend trying to watch a movie with my 11-year-old great nephew on Black history, so that he can understand, because they're not taught who they are and where they come from. You know, like we were, the 60s children, who were still, my parents were still fighting the civil rights movements. And so I try to have that feeling. You know, he said something to me that he was like, can we watch so and so and so, and then we can watch a movie on Saturday? Like, he's like, can we watch the dinosaurs or something, and then we can watch that? Which I thought was really cute. But he looks forward to watching Just Mercy and Marshall. We watched Selma. Harriet together, and he's learned a lot that he didn't have the opportunity to get in school. So I get it.
Good
Is there a
idea.
meeting? Is there a meeting this coming Monday with Greg Knepp?
There,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because I, as most pastors, or as many pastors, I was a bit verbose last week. So yes, I didn't get to talk as much about the civil rights movement and the role of Lutherans during the civil rights movement. So we've added a session, and so next Monday at 7:00 there will be, and I'm just going to spend about a half hour to 40 minutes, and then we'll have some kind of wrap up questions to, again, addressing specifically what is the role of the church and the Lutheran Church in particular in all of this.
Okay. So we'll get a Zoom request like we did this week.
mhm. Yep, I'll be sending that out
Great.
towards the end of the week. Yeah.
All right. Well, I got to
All right,
get
well,
going. I have my dinner's ready, but
we've reached 8:34, so we're over time, and I
Oh,
really
okay.
appreciate you guys hanging on till the end here and just starting to talk about some next steps. I think I got to keep the momentum going. I think it's
That's
really
right.
important.
yeah.
Thank
I'm
you, Kathy.
grateful for
Thank
all of you.
Kathy. Great
Thank you.
job,
you.
Kathy.
All righty.
I
Bye-bye.
remember the census too. There's a lot of people out
Yes.
there that still need to be
Yes.
counted.
I know yeah, I know a
Yep.
lot of people are trying to get it done. Yep. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Great
you.
group.
And
Good night.
Justina,
Brad,
Justina.
check your phone, Brad.
I am
Yeah,
here.
I saw it.
Hey,
Thanks, Lydia.
sweetie.
Okay.
Just send me the chat.